Hey everybody, how's it going? Matthew Kadish here, author of the Earthman Jack Space Saga, available over on Amazon.com, so go check it out if you want to support the channel. And today we are going to be talking about the big news that hit this week, which is that Marvel head honcho Kevin Feige is going to be producing a Star Wars movie. And this is big for a lot of different reasons, and ever since the news broke, there's been a lot of speculation running rampant out there, and I'm probably going to make a couple videos on this topic, just discussing all the various nuances that and implications that this could have, not only in the entertainment industry, but in fandom as well. And but today, I just want to kind of cover the broader implications of this for Lucasfilm. And I know I'm a little bit late to the party because this story broke a couple days ago, but I wanted to, I'm not really someone who does breaking news. I kind of like to sit back and look at how things play out and analyze them and figure out what exactly the implications are, because sometimes in the initial rush to get this stuff out, people kind of gloss over some of the more nuanced implications of this stuff, and sometimes news comes out a couple of days later that has an impact on it. So I kind of like to bide my time, I guess you'd say, and kind of take a step back and look at these things from a top-down perspective. So if you are a YouTube viewer who is really up to date on his entertainment and film and TV news and information, this story is probably not new to you, but what I want to do is offer you a perspective that you might not get with other news sources or other YouTube channels here. So I'm going to break this down for you in just a little bit right after we cover the important parts of this actual news article. So we're going to head on over to the Hollywood Reporter here. And this is where the story actually broke. It broke on September 25th at 6:40 p.m. Headline: Star Wars shocker, Marvel's Kevin Feige developing new movie for Disney. And this article is by Kim Masters. And this was no doubt a press release put out by Disney, kind of stating this and controlling the information that gets out there, as studios usually do when they make big announcements like this. But I'm not going to read through the whole article like I normally do, just because I want to devote a little bit more time to talking about the implications of this. But I am going to highlight some of the important bits in here. So the article starts off with: Lucasfilm's Kathleen Kennedy is pursuing a new era in Star Wars storytelling, and knowing what a diehard fan Kevin is, it made sense for these two extraordinary producers to work on a Star Wars film together, Walt Disney Studios co-chairman Alan Horn tells The Hollywood Reporter. So Alan Horn, for those of you who don't know, he's basically the guy who runs Disney's movie production arm. Every studio that's making movies for Disney, be it Marvel, Lucasfilm, Pixar, whatever the case may be, whether it's animated or live action, they go through Alan Horn. He's kind of the creative head of the motion picture arm of Walt Disney Studios, and he has a co-worker, I guess you could call him, who handles more of the business side of things, while Alan kind of handles more of the creative side of things. So he has his hands in all of the movie production, and he's basically Kathleen Kennedy and Kevin Feige's boss for all intents and purposes. The only person above Alan Horn is Bob Iger, who is the CEO of Disney Studios. So it looks like Alan Horn was the one who kind of put together the press release for this, or at least was featured in the press release to the Hollywood Reporter. And that speaks a lot to how corporate and controlled this announcement was. To the surprise of no one, Kevin Feige is a huge Star Wars fan. It might surprise many, however, that the Marvel Studios chief is going to be developing a Star Wars movie, as Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy makes new plans for a wave of projects set in the universe, The Hollywood Reporter has learned. Feige had discussed a foray into the Star Wars universe in a late summer meeting with Kennedy And studio co-chairman Alan Horn and Alan Bergman, that's the co-worker that handles the business end of things in the Disney movie production arm. Sources say, in response to a query from The Hollywood Reporter, Walt Disney Studios co-chairman and chief creative officer Horn said, the quote that we had up there, "Some see this move as a prelude to a larger role for Feige within Lucasfilm, while others say it merely reflects the Marvel executive's passion for the franchise. A top Disney source says Kennedy remains in charge with no plans for any changes." And by that they mean there are no plans for any changes in the executive structure over at Lucasfilm. One knowledgeable source says Feige has told a major actor that there's a specific role he would like that person to play if and when he makes the movie. Now, this is pretty big. This is kind of a big bombshell right here. I'm going to make a separate video covering this specific line in this article. And so like this video, we're not going to be speculating on the major actor involved. Rather, we're going to be speculating more on the first part of this, which is that Kennedy is going to remain in charge and no plans for any changes. So I was very I was very bullish on this news. And what I mean by that, I was very excited about it. I was very gung-ho on this news because initially my reaction was that this is the first step for removing Kathleen Kennedy from the head of Lucasfilm. Now, I've never made any bones about the fact that I am not a Kathleen Kennedy fan. I think that she's a fine logistical producer. She is someone who made some of the most classic movies in Hollywood's heyday with Spielberg and Lucas, and she produced some of my all-time favorite films like Indiana Jones and things of that nature, Jurassic Park. So, however, her skills as a producer and her skills as an executive have never quite matched up. So, despite the fact that she's a good producer, in the technical sense, she has been a pretty terrible creative executive and a poor choice to lead Lucasfilm Limited, in my opinion. And that's not to be sexist. This is not because she's a woman. It's because that the choices that she has made with the Star Wars franchise have been very questionable from the get-go. I do not like the direction that she's taken these films. I do not like the choices that she's made in making them. And I just think that she was the wrong person to be put in charge of such a beloved franchise. Now, that being said, my initial thought, I've always been kind of the lone voice out in the wilderness telling people that Kathleen Kennedy is not going to be going anywhere, okay? There was a time period about a year ago where people were convinced that Disney was going to fire her. And I was out there in the forefront kind of saying, like, guys, she's not going to be fired. Her contract's going to be renewed. She's entrenched in there. She's safe. She's going to be there for the next 10 years. Everyone told me I was crazy up until the point that it was announced that her contract had been renewed. And then everyone who had the inside sources that she was going to be fired suddenly had egg on their face. And I was kind of vindicated in my analysis of the situation. Now, that's not to say I'm always right about everything, but it is to say that I think I have a perspective on the entertainment industry that a lot of people who've never worked in it or lived in it might not have. So my initial thoughts on this news that Kevin Feige was going to be producing a Star Wars movie was that this was the opening salvo, or I guess you could say the beginning of the end for Kathleen Kennedy's tenure as president of Lucasfilm Limited. And the reason I thought this is because normally what happens when a studio wants to get rid of an executive, but they don't want to outright fire them, is they will bring in someone to kind of share their position, right? It'd be like a kind of co-president or someone on the level of that person who's going to start splitting duties with that person. And you see this happen all the time in the studio system, where someone's entrenched in their job, but they're not very well liked or respected. However, they can't, legally be gotten rid of, or because of contractual obligations, or they, for whatever reason, it would be politically wrong for the studio to fire them, publicly in the eyes of their peers in the industry. It's not something that would go over well, cause a stir. It's kind of, the way that they backdoor fire people is they'll bring in someone to kind of share the position, and then they'll slowly start to allocate more and more responsibilities to the new person while the old person gets neutered. And what will happen is once that person is miserable and doesn't have any power and doesn't want to do their job anymore, they will either move them out laterally to a new position that is less important, or they'll create a position out of thin air that is just kind of like a hollow title that they'll move the person into, or they will promote them in some manner to a better position where they are still neutered, but they get an increase in pay and increase in profile and stuff like that. So, that's part of the failing upward mentality that Hollywood has. So when I first saw this article, I was convinced that that was what was happening with Lucasfilm, is that Kevin Feige had immense success with making Marvel the powerhouse movie producing studio in Hollywood. He's done what no other producer in history has been able to do, which is create a cinematic universe that has spanned over a decade. He's got more hits under his belt than probably any other producer in Disney's stable, with maybe the exception of Jerry Bruckheimer. It's hard to say. But the point here is that Kevin Feige is a super producer in every sense of the word. He's a guy who knows how to make movies, but in addition to the quantity of movies he's able to produce, he keeps the quality of them very high. And the fact that he was able to keep all these disparate storylines kind of straight and somewhat coherent over the course of a decade is a real testament to his creative vision as a producer. And so I know there are a lot of people out there who are critical of Kevin Feige, saying that Marvel movies are too formulaic, they're getting to be too political, et cetera, et cetera. But speaking from a strictly professional standpoint, Kevin Feige is probably one of the most skilled and best producers working in Hollywood right now. He's a guy who understands story. He's a guy who respects source material. He's a guy who understands the characters of the movies he's making. And he's also a guy who understands the fandom. And it's no accident that Marvel has kind of ascended to the preeminent movie studio, and that this wave of comic book movies has become the number one genre in Hollywood right now, and over the course of the past 10 years. So the news that he was going to be working on a Star Wars film was kind of my inkling that Kathleen Kennedy was eventually going to be replaced by Kevin Feige, for the reasons I just told you. Now, since that initial reaction, I've had some time to think about it, and I've had some time to consider some alternate possibilities here, and some of them I think are a lot more likely than the backdoor firing of Kathleen Kennedy. So the second theory that I had is that we all know that Bob Iger is going to be stepping down as CEO of Disney Studios in 2021, just 2 years away from now as of the recording of this video. And under Bob Iger's leadership, Disney has become the biggest studio in the history of Hollywood. Like, seriously, ever since he took over, he's brought Disney to heights previously unimaginable by industry standards. I think when he took over, Disney's stock price was like $25 a share, and now it's upwards of $140 a share, and that's all because of Iger. His strategy of acquiring companies like Marvel, Pixar, 20th Century Fox, Lucasfilm, all this stuff has really paid off for the studio. It's given them a great deal of licensing revenue, and most of the movies coming out in theaters are Disney productions in some way. And the launch of Disney Plus coming out in November is going to be the future of the studio, and that was all his brainchild. But, he's going to be stepping down in 2021. He's announced his retirement already, so that's in the works. He's not going to be involved with Disney too much longer. And so that's led to a lot of speculation as to who's going to replace him. And by all accounts, his replacement is going to be a guy called Kevin Feige. And Kevin Feige is basically the guy who's running Disney's direct-to-consumer digital offerings. He's kind of like their president of digital whatever. And basically, he's the guy who's going to be running Disney Plus, and he's the guy who's going to be basically overseeing the digital platform. And because Disney is placing so much importance on their direct-to-consumer offerings, this guy is more in tune with Iger's vision for the future of the company than anyone else. And he's been with the company for a long time. He's been kind of Robert Iger's right-hand man. So when Iger steps down, the smart money right now, and this could always change, but Kevin Feige is going to be the guy to replace Bob Iger. But another avenue to this is that Marvel's head of movie development, which is Alan Horn, which we referenced in the article a little bit earlier, he's also been rumored to be getting ready to retire, basically. The guy's 75. He may want to step back once Iger leaves, because Iger was the one who brought him into the company, and just enjoy his life and his success and his retirement. And so after I started digging into this a little bit more, I began to think, well, what if they're kind of grooming Feige to take over Horn's position once Iger leaves? So Iger retires, Mayer gets promoted to CEO, Horn retires, Feige gets promoted to the head of motion pictures. I think that that's probably more likely to happen than him replacing Kathleen Kennedy. So basically, Feige would become Kennedy's boss, but whoever replaces him as the head of Marvel Studios would also answer to Feige. So Feige would still be in control over the Marvel productions, but he would also be overseeing Star Wars and Pixar and pretty much every movie that Disney makes. And because he has been such a successful super producer, it makes sense that he's being groomed to replace Alan Horn as the creative head of the motion picture arm of Disney Studios. So I actually think that this move is more likely a precursor for that than a backdoor firing of Kathleen Kennedy. For a number of reasons, but it just makes a lot more sense because I don't think Kathleen Kennedy is someone who's widely disliked at Disney. I think she has a lot of powerful allies, and I don't think she's going to be going anywhere until she chooses to do so. That's always been kind of my take on it. So my hopes that Kathleen Kennedy was kind of being pushed out were quickly dashed. Now, as an addendum to that, there will be signs that I could be wrong. If we see in the future that Kathleen Kennedy is stepping away from the motion picture end of Star Wars to focus on the TV offerings for Disney Plus, and Kevin Feige or someone else is giving the responsibility of producing the Star Wars movies while she focuses on the Star Wars television offerings, that's a sure sign that she's slowly being pushed out, because that means that she's having responsibility and duties and power taken away from her and given to someone else in favor of her. So that would definitely happen. It might not happen until Horn is replaced by Feige, if Feige thinks that Kathleen Kennedy is inept in some way. But that remains to be seen. Now, all that being said, I don't think that either firing Kathleen Kennedy or promoting Kevin Feige to the head of Disney's motion picture things is the impetus for this announcement. And I'll tell you why that is. So my first question with this announcement was that, number one, what's going to happen with the Benioff and Weiss trilogy that has already been announced? And number two, what's going to happen with the Rian Johnson trilogy, which has already been announced? Because according to this article, Kevin Feige is only going to be producing a single Star Wars movie. It's not a trilogy. It's not, a series of films. It's a single Star Wars movie that apparently has nothing to do with Benioff and Weiss or Rian Johnson. The only thing that I can think of that would cause Disney to bring in their super producer, their heavy hitter at this stage in the game, is that neither Rian Johnson nor Benioff and Weiss's movies, Star Wars movies, are going to be done in time to get them produced for the release dates that Disney has set for the future Star Wars movies. Now, for those of you who don't know, Disney has basically, they schedule out their movies up to 5 years in advance. So when they announced that they were scaling back the release of Star Wars movies from once a year to once every 2 years, they were going to alternate it with the release of the new Avatar film. So basically, 2020 will see the release of the next Avatar movie, then 2021 would see the release of a new Star Wars movie, then the year after that, another Avatar movie, then the year after that, another Star Wars movie, and so on and so forth until they run their course. So the next Star Wars movie is set to be released in December of 2021, which just so happens to be the year that Bob Iger is planning to step down. Now, that's only 2 years away as of the recording of this video. And typically, you want to have something in development for, 6 months to a year. And then you go out and you shoot the movie and you get it done in time for its release date. Now, Benioff and Weiss, I've long believed were kind of next up. Their proposed Star Wars trilogy was going to be the one to fill that initial 2021, 2023, 2025 release date timeframe. But they recently signed an overall deal with Netflix after the ending of Game of Thrones. And my guess is that they're going to have their plate full developing a lot of stuff for that, in addition to the Star Wars movies that they were supposed to be producing. And I think what's happened is that it's become clear that they're not going to be able to get their trilogy developed in time to meet the 2021 release date. And we all know that Rian Johnson is an exceptionally slow writer, not to mention a bad writer, but he's exceptionally slow. And so his trilogy is not going to be anywhere near ready to go in front of cameras in a year's time. So what's Disney to do? They still have these release dates that they have to meet. So what they do is they bring in their heavy hitter, Kevin Feige, and they task him with producing a standalone single Star Wars movie to fill that 2021 slot so that Benioff and Weiss have 4 years to develop their Star Wars trilogy and get it ready to be shot and in front of cameras and to meet the other release dates of their bi-yearly release schedule. So I think that is actually the impetus for Kevin Feige being brought on to produce a Star Wars film. And the reason that Kathleen Kennedy was not tasked with this is because she's proven that she has a hard time producing these Star Wars movies. I mean, if you look at her track record, there was a lot of chaos behind the scenes with Rogue One. There was major chaos with Solo. The Last Jedi, there was no chaos behind the scenes, but the movie ended up being terrible and dividing the fandom. So she has not had the best time getting these movies made. And so with Kevin Feige, this has kind of been his bag, where he's able to develop multiple projects, have them come off without a hitch, and be good. And I really think that's the crux of the issue here, which is that Disney just needed someone who was already in-house, who they knew they could rely on to get a good Star Wars movie out the door in order to meet their release window, while giving Benioff and Weiss the time that they need to properly develop a new trilogy. And that's really what I think is going on here. I don't think that this is a backdoor firing anymore. I don't think that, well, it could still be a grooming for Feige to replace Horn ultimately. But at the same time, I think it's that simple. It's that Disney needs a Star Wars movie to come out in 2021, and Feige is the guy that they're tapping to make sure that that happens. And, he's a guy he's proven that, he can work on multiple projects at once. He's overseeing all the Marvel films. But in addition to that, he's now overseeing, the Spider-Man films with Sony. And, the guy's just a machine. He's overseeing all the Disney Plus offerings and stuff like that. So he's got his fingers in a lot of different pies, but he seems to be able to handle it, unlike Kathleen Kennedy, who doesn't seem to be able to handle multitasking like that very well. And I think that there's been a lot of criticism about Disney's choice to utilize Kevin Feige in such a way, because a lot of people are thinking that he's going to make a lateral move from Marvel to Lucasfilm. I don't think that's the case. I really do think that this is going to be a one-off for him, or possibly a three-off if it's decided that Disney wants to drop Benioff and Weiss and go with Feige to develop a new trilogy or something like that. But I just think that this is Disney being under a time crunch for a new Star Wars film and tapping, their number one guy to come in and get the job done. Now, there's been a lot of criticism in terms of worrying that Feige is too woke. He's injecting too much politics into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he's going to do that with Star Wars. There are people out there who are saying that Star Wars is already dead. Kathleen Kennedy killed it. Not even Feige can fix this thing. And also that a lot of people don't like the Marvel formula that Feige has created, and so they're worried that Star Wars is going to be more formulaic. And I'm going to address each one of these criticisms, because I think each one of them is pretty unfounded for the most part. The first thing is that Star Wars has always been very formulaic as well. Like, if you look at A New Hope, that's about as formulaic of a hero's journey as you can get. When you study three-act structure of screenwriting in film school, Star Wars is the quintessential, structure that you study, because it's the most formulaic hero's journey that you can possibly follow. It's a very well-made movie, and that's because that the formula it follows has been time-tested. Now, that's not to say Star Wars doesn't take a few liberties. Like Empire Strikes Back, it's not exactly formulaic, but it does follow a certain formula. So I'm not saying that Star Wars never deviates. However, I think it could be argued that Star Wars is really two exceptional movies, those being A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. One decent movie, which is Return of the Jedi. The three prequels being very subpar films, and the new Disney offerings being anywhere from mediocre to flat out the worst things ever made on cinema. So, there is something to be said about having a formula that works, and Marvel has a formula that has stood the test of time. It's been making blockbuster after blockbuster for over a decade now. Yes, they have stumbled in a few instances. Films like Iron Man 3, Thor 2, Captain Marvel, couple other examples of that where, the Marvel movies haven't been good, but even at their worst, the Marvel movies haven't been bad. I'd say that their biggest sin is just being boring for the most part when they are bad. So the Marvel formula works. And if Kevin Feige wants to come into Star Wars and follow a formula that works, I'm all for that, because storytelling is about formulas. It's about structure. It's about, giving the audience what they want. And that's the most important thing here, is that for the longest time under the Kathleen Kennedy regime, they have been refusing to give fans what it is they want. I think Feige, more than anyone, knows how to deliver to fan expectations. So I'm very hopeful that his Star Wars movie is going to be good. And that's the reason why, is because unlike Kathleen Kennedy, he seems to actually be in touch with what the fandom is craving, and he knows how to deliver that. Now, a counterpoint to that is that Feige is getting to be too woke, and he's injecting all types of identity politics into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And to a certain extent, that's true. Like, we've definitely seen a rise in political messaging ever since, I'd say, Black Panther came out. So Black Panther, Captain Marvel, there was a little bit of it in Endgame. And there was also, on the slate of Marvel movies to come out, the female Thor stuff and things like that. However, it feels like rather than, kind of going woke, he's just following the trend of the comics, which is something he's always done. Which, he pulls from the source material. And because the comics have gone woke, it makes sense that he's probably, adapting that to the big screen. But he's doing it in a smart way. Like, he's not really doing a lot of political messaging. He's not forcing an agenda. He still puts the story first, and the political messages in the Marvel films are kind of sprinkled in there. I think that the fact that the Captain America movies, which could have easily been a huge political preach fest, stayed away from that for the most part and just delivered a really good political thriller story. We got that with Winter Soldier. We got that with Civil War. Captain America never crossed that line into being either a liberal or a conservative, a Democrat or Republican. He was always about the ideals of America, the ideals of freedom, the ideals of doing the right thing, stuff like that. Stuff everyone can agree on. I think they walk that tightrope really well. Now, it can be argued that Captain Marvel was kind of like their first real overly political movie. But even that movie, I felt like, despite the fact that Brie Larson and her involvement in the movie made it political, and the directors and writers that they had on that movie injected a lot of the pro-feminist, anti-male stuff in there, it never felt like it was beating you over the head for the most part. I mean, there were some parts in there where it was like, okay, like, we get it. But it didn't take me out of the movie too much. I mean, the end fight scene where they're fighting to Gwen Stefani's "I'm Just a Girl," that was a little on the nose. But as I said, I think that Kevin Feige learned from Captain Marvel, and I think that he realized that they might have gone a little bit too heavy-handed with that, and he might be pulling back. The whole female Thor thing that a lot of people are pointing to, I don't believe that that's going to be as political as people think. I think Taika Waititi, the guy who is writing and directing Thor: Love and Thunder, is a very good humorist, and I think he's going to treat it more as a romantic comedy, and it's going to be very funny and exciting and interesting. And the whole thing about, the female Thor getting the power of Thor, I don't think it's going to play out like it did in the comics. I don't think it's going to be a man-bashing type thing. I think it's going to be an interesting kind of rivalry between Thor feeling a little bit, insecure, and Jane Foster, learning to deal with these immense powers and how that affects their relationship with one another. So I'm kind of taking a wait and see approach to Phase 4 of Marvel, simply because even though on the surface it looks like the political messaging is going to be very high, I think that Kevin Feige is a smart enough producer where he's not going to hit you over the head with it, and he's also not going to let it derail the story. Now, I could be wrong, but that's why I'm saying I'm going to wait and see how this turns out. So, I don't care that if his Star Wars movie is formulaic, because as long as the formula works, it's going to be good. I don't care if he's injecting a little bit more politics into his movies, because so far he's shown that it doesn't affect the enjoyment of the story for the most part. But I understand why people would be upset about that, and why people might not want to support, his work in Star Wars, or his, the direction that he's taken the MCU. So, I'm pretty hopeful that this news is going to kind of signal that Disney is doing a course correction with Star Wars. I think that when we see The Mandalorian and some of the Disney Plus offerings from Lucasfilm, that we're going to get a real sense of how well they are currently course correcting. If the Disney Plus Star Wars offerings are good, it means that they're on the right track. And if the movies start to get good, like if Episode 9 is better than expected, if Kevin Feige's Star Wars is entertaining and good and not insulting to the fans, then I think that it's going to be obvious that Disney is taking steps to fix the mistakes it made with the franchise. And I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm willing to go along with them and see if they're going to continue ruining this beloved franchise, or if they're going to try to salvage it. Now, a lot of people have already said, oh, Star Wars is dead, let it die, let's move on with our lives. But, being a fan, I don't want Star Wars to die. I want it to be great again. I want it to be the type of thing I can obsess over. I've recently been playing a video game called Galaxy of Heroes. It's a Star Wars character or hero collection game, where basically they create all these characters from the Star Wars saga, and you unlock them and you add them to your roster and you upgrade them. And I've been having so much fun with that, because it's truly about the characters that I love in Star Wars. And it kind of reminded me about what got me into the franchise to begin with, and it's this love for all these characters, even from the movies that I didn't like. I've got these characters, and because they're Star Wars, there's something that endears them to me. And so I want to see Disney kind of learn from its mistakes, listen to the fans, and fix things, because I want good Star Wars movies. I want good Star Wars TV shows. I want good Star Wars books. I want cool Star Wars toys. I want great Star Wars video games. I'm a fan, and fans should want the thing that they're a fan of to be good. Now, just because you don't like the direction that Disney's taken this stuff doesn't mean you should abandon it. You should be up there fighting to make it good again. And I think Kevin Feige is one of the guys who could potentially give Lucasfilm the kick in the butt that it needs to shift its focus, to course correct, and to start giving us good Star Wars content again. Now, it might be a little bit formulaic. It might have a little bit of political messaging in it. But as long as it's better than what we've been getting up to this point, I'm going to be happy, because it shows that they're improving upon the material, and that they're taking it in a different direction, and they're trying to give us what we want. The worst thing we can do is walk away. We have to be vocal in our criticisms. We have to be respectful in our criticisms. And when they start doing stuff right, when they start actually trying to change, we have to be supportive of it, because otherwise, what's the point? If nothing that they do is ever going to make us happy, why should they change? Why not just go even further in the direction that they were going if they know that they can't make us happy? And this is why I don't understand a lot of the criticism of this particular announcement. This has to be something that even the people who don't like Kevin Feige and what he did with Marvel, or what he's doing with Marvel, they have to be like, okay, I'm not expecting anything from this, but I'm at least going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to wait and see what you do, and hopefully you do right by us. There were some people who kind of pointed out to me that the fact that they have discarded the entire expanded universe in terms of the books once they took over the franchise. That Disney has basically irreparably damaged Star Wars. Like after the Last Jedi, there's nowhere to go forward with it, and I don't agree with that. If there's one talent that Kevin Feige has showcased in his time, it is that he knows how to draw from source material to make good movies. And I think that if Feige, rather than come up with something completely original, if he goes to this expanded universe that has been, kind of relegated to the Legacy Collection and starts pulling elements from these things like he did with the Marvel Comics to make a unique and interesting but faithful movie to the franchise, I think that could be a model for future filmmakers who are going to be brought in to make future Star Wars films. And that to me is not a bad thing. If they do come up with a Star Wars formula, I think that's a good thing because it would keep something like The Last Jedi from happening again. The biggest problem with The Last Jedi is that it was too radically different from what fans expected and wanted for the most part. Now, there are people out there who love The Last Jedi, who defend it to their dying breath. That's fine. But in terms of being a movie that's true to the characters that people have grown up with and loved for 30-something years, it just was too radically different for its own good. It was a Rian Johnson movie. It was not a Star Wars movie. And Star Wars movies need to be Star Wars. They can't be handled by an auteur. They need to be catering to the audience, to the fan base, in order to make people happy. Now, if you look at something like Rogue One, that was a movie that took some chances. But at its core, it was faithful to Star Wars, and it gave the fans a Star Wars story that they've never seen before, but also that they'd been craving. The third act of that movie is absolutely fantastic, in my opinion. Even Solo, for all of its faults, felt like a better Star Wars movie, more true to Star Wars than something like The Last Jedi did. So if we can get more movies like Rogue One and Solo that don't have all the production problems that kind of hamstrung them, I think that that's going to be key to making really good Star Wars movies going forward. And who knows, if Kevin Feige's Star Wars film ends up being really good and being a big hit, Disney may decide to let him run things instead of Benioff and Weiss, and they may actually decide to get rid of Rian Johnson and let Feige, bring in his own people, or have Rian Johnson answer to Feige instead of Kathleen Kennedy, and Feige might be able to kind of rein in Johnson's, baser instincts, for lack of a better word. Anyway, guys, I think I've rambled on about this long enough. There are a lot of implications here. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a series of videos on this because there's just so much to unpack here. But I'd love to hear what you think about my take on this, what my analysis of it was. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? And as always, for more movie, TV, and entertainment news and analysis, please subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate all the support you guys have been giving me. The channel has been growing pretty steadily, and I'm trying to put out a video a day just to kind of keep up with everything that's going on while I write my books and work on my other projects. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch these videos and comment and all that good stuff. And this is Matthew Kadish. I will catch you guys in the next video.